going to continue with the coronavirus. Emergency cases, as we know, surging globally, fast approaching 2 million here in the U.S., with the death toll now topping 112,000. Infections are still on the rise in at least 21 states, and hospitalizations increasing in 8 states. Now there's growing concern about those nationwide protests as members of the D.C. National Guard have tested positive for COVID after last week's demonstrations. Dr. Anthony Fauci calling the virus his worst nightmare, and he joins us now exclusively on GMA this morning. Dr. Fauci, we always appreciate you taking time to talk to our audience. We really do appreciate that. And you just heard me talk about how members of the D.C. National Guard testing positive. Sir, how concerned are you about it spreading due to these protests that we're seeing, even though we see many people at the protests that are wearing masks?
Yes, I mean, the most important thing, unfortunately, the report of the National Guardsmen being infected is certainly disturbing, but is not surprising. The issue of physical separation is important. Masks can help, but it's masks plus physical separation. And when you get congregations like we saw with the demonstrations, as we have said, myself and other health officials, that's taking a risk. And unfortunately, what we're seeing now is just an example of the kinds of things we were concerned about. So I wouldn't be surprised that members of the congregation that were there demonstrating could also be infected. And many of them would then go back to where they were, because not everyone was demonstrating in the city where they live. They've come from the outside. So it's the kind of things that we were concerned about. And unfortunately, we're seeing it come true right now.
Yes, but people, they are very passionate about what they are fighting for, and it's very evident that they feel that it's worth the possible risk. We see that states are opening, New York City opening this week as well. What are the concerns there as we are seeing, it rise a little bit like that? So what is most important for people, do you feel, for people, the public, to know this morning, Dr. Fauci?
Well, what they need to know is that when you open, that doesn't mean that everything is okay and you can do whatever you want. You still have to practice a degree of caution and carefully go through the process of trying to normalize. That means you still should be wearing a mask. You still should be trying as best as possible to have that physical distancing. You still need to wash your hands as often as you possibly can and avoid congregation in large numbers. These things, even though you're trying appropriately, because we know everyone wants to approach normality and get things back to normal, including the economy, but that doesn't mean that all bets are off. And that's the reason why we say, be careful and do it prudently.
And the vaccine, people want to know about the vaccine. And you have said that you're very confident that we know that it's being tested in people right now, but you're very confident that there'll be not just one, but there'll be more than one. What leads you to be so optimistic about having more than one vaccine available? And when do you think it'll be available to the public?
Okay, so let me just clarify one thing. When you're developing vaccines, there's never a guarantee that you're going to have a safe and effective vaccine. What I'm confident about is how well the process is proceeding in the development of more than one candidate, that in early testing, both in the animals and in the phase 1 testing in humans, looks quite promising, which makes me cautiously optimistic. As we get into the early summer, we're going to be going into advanced clinical trials in at least one and close to maybe 3 or more candidates. Hopefully by the time we get to the mid and late fall, if the process goes well, we will have enough information to be able to make a decision whether the vaccine is safe and effective, which means if we are in good shape and that happens, we could have a vaccine either by the end of this calendar year or in the first few months of 2021. So that's the thing that makes me feel confident that the process is really on track. And that's good news, again, in the context of never being able to guarantee success. Things are clearly going in the right direction.
That's very promising indeed. And once there is a vaccine, how often do you think we would need it? Would it be like getting the flu shot every year?
You know, we don't know that right now. We're going to take it one step at a time. The first thing we want to do is to determine if it's safe and if it protects. How long that protection lasts, we're going to have to obviously observe that. And that's the reason why when you make a vaccine, it isn't the end of the game. You have to keep following and see how long the duration of the protection is. We hope it's substantial, but if it isn't, you could always give a boost. So right now, step one, let's just prove that it's safe and effective, and then we'll go on from there.
Yes, that's an important step one. I can understand that. Also, let's talk a little bit about the range of symptoms and the severity, the range and the severity. And the WHO said something recently, suggested that asymptomatic spread is rare, and they then walked it back just a little bit. So can you clarify that for us?
Okay, so that's two questions. Let me take the first one. Clearly, this is a very unusual infection because, as you pointed out correctly, the range of manifestations are extraordinary. You can have people who are infected and have no symptoms. You can have people who are infected and have mild symptoms that they barely notice. Others have more severe symptoms. They become even more severe, requiring them to be at home for a couple of weeks. Some require hospitalization, and some require intensive care. And as we know, unfortunately, over 110,000 have already died in this country. So the range is extraordinary. To your question about asymptomatic transmission, what happened the other day is that a member of the WHO was saying that transmission from an asymptomatic person to an uninfected person was very rare. They walked that back because there's no evidence to indicate that's the case. And in fact, the evidence that we have, given the percentage of people, which is about 45% of the totality of infected people, likely are without symptoms. And we know from epidemiological studies that they can transmit to someone who is uninfected, even when they're without symptoms. So to make a statement to say that's a rare event was not correct. And that's the reason why the WHO walked that back.
And Dr. Fauci, in hearing all of this, how does that, people are wondering about schools reopening in the fall. So what kind of impact will that have on the possibility of that happening?
Well, you know, you've got to be careful because people talk about schools opening in the broad sense. We have a very large country, and the dynamics of infection really differ from a region, state, city, town, and even county. So the school opening would really have to be dictated by the degree and the dynamics of infection in a particular community. There are going to be some communities in which the infection rate and dynamic is extremely low, so schools can open with little risk. There may be other areas, depending upon the activity of the virus, where you might want to modify the school situation. And there are a number of creative ways to do that the authorities have figured out. You know, you could stagger the classes, you could keep people separated. It really depends upon the status of the location in which you're at. You don't want to make a unidimensional decision about the entire country. You've got to look about where you are and what the dynamics of the infection are.
Not one size fits all. Well, Dr. Anthony Fauci, we are so grateful for your work and your willingness to continue to come on our program and to share. We really do. And please take care. Hope your family and all are doing well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.